Deputy Speaker.
I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Deputy Speaker, what's it going to take for this Labor government to address the youth crime crisis gripping this state? A crisis that is impacting Queenslanders at home, in their businesses, on the streets, in every part of this state. How much more loss? How much more pain? How much more suffering until this government admits that Queensland is in the grip of a youth crime crisis? These are the laws Queenslanders want. The LNP have brought them. Labor must support them. There is no other option. Our priority is supporting victims and ensuring there are less in the future. Labor's is running from its record. I have spoken to the family of Eileen White and given them a commitment we will see this through. And their comments ring so true at a time of great trauma. If we can't feel safe walking around, there's a problem. There should not have been a death to bring action. It's shutting the gate after the horse has bolted. And this morning, too little, too late. It's not the first tragedy in this state. And I've spoken to the family members of many victims in this state. Thousands of other Queenslanders have also had their lives ripped up by youth crime. And it happens every day. It happens to the vehicle they need to make a living, the conversation they have to have with a loved one, a young child, when they're broken into. And there's never been more victims in this state. Just before I came in this House, I received a message from a young business owner called Mark. Mark runs Tribe Coffee, a great business on the north side, frequented by the member for Clayfield and indeed many of our emergency services. I met Mark about a year ago, and one of his staff had been held up at gunpoint. Well, overnight that business was broken into again. And I asked Mark, what's the impact for you, mate? And he said, well, there's $1,900 to replace a freezer. There's about $400 to replace stock. But in a few weeks' time, my insurance premium's up for renewal.
Sorry to interrupt, Member for Broadwater. Can we pause the clock? Can I just get you to confirm that this matter that you're referring to is not before the courts?
It's not, Mr Speaker.
Thank you. All right, you have the call.
In a few weeks' time, he gets his insurance renewal. And that's where the long-term sting in the tail will be. And Mark wants to know, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for this government to embark on real action? Instead, they are running from their record. A record where an Attorney-General who is back in the same seat from nearly a decade ago says a penalty that allows for the persons to remain in the community is preferable, who says evidence clearly shows that increasing the severity of punishment does not reduce offending, nor does it reduce reoffending. Well, the number of repeat offenders have gone from 10% to 20%. So I'm not sure that cuts true. And today, a Premier who spoke for 3 minutes and couldn't even defend her legacy for 3 seconds. That's the record they're running from. A Premier who said there are more police in this state, despite the thin blue line getting a little thinner to the tune of 322 officers in the last 18 months. Despite a commitment to add more, it has gone backwards. The LNP's crime amendments will table to remove detention as a last resort and allow victims of crime and the media back into our children's courtrooms. The Premier has said they might investigate, they might consider it, they'll ponder changes at an unknown time in the future. If the Labor government won't act to fix the youth crime crisis, we will. It starts with removing detention as a last resort to allow the judiciary to do their job. And today the Premier tried to blur the lines by talking about other forms of sentencing. Let me make this very clear. The LNP wants to remove detention as a last resort to repair the mess created by this government nearly 9 years ago. The LNP wants to open the Children's Court to allow family of the victims and the media to see that justice is being done, to repair the mistake from those opposite that they created by watering down the laws nearly a decade ago. The rights of victims should be above the rights of offenders. What's it going to take to agree to these sensible solutions? And it's not just the youth crime crisis that's impacting this state. There is a health crisis, and Queensland is ground zero. Our priority is releasing data in real time. Labor's priority is changing the narrative and hiding the data. We have the right priorities for Queensland's future when it comes to repairing the health system that those opposite have starved through a lack of resources, a lack of transparency, a lack of putting doctors and nurses back in charge. Labor's priority is just crafting the narrative. The Minister told Parliament on the 25th of May, and I quote, "There are no plans to change how these measures are reported. RTI disclosures show historical graphs have been amended to wipe information prior to 2020. Ministerial staff were also pushing the department to use built beds instead of operational beds. The RTI also shows there are weekly meetings about data which involves the Minister and her staff. Why is this information kept from Queenslanders?" On Saturday afternoon, the Minister finally released the overdue December quarter figures, and the Premier today said it's getting better. Not only is it not getting better, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is getting worse at a rate of knots. Ambulance ramping in Queensland is at 43%. That is the worst in the nation. It's nearly double what it is in New South Wales. It's 10% more than WA and Victoria, and it's the highest figure ever recorded in a December quarter. For the first time ever, the elective surgery waiting list has surged past 60,000. And in a moment, the Shadow Health Minister is going to show what that actually means to Queenslanders. For the first time, the specialist wait list has gone past 290,000 patients. And in a moment, the Shadow Health Minister is going to explain what that means to Queensland. And then on Sunday, Metro South going on bypass, a practice this government said doesn't happen anymore, and a practice that Queenslanders would never have known occurred unless a brave paramedic sent us a screenshot of a message. And to hear paramedics talk about a system at breaking point, the lid being lifted, ready to blow up, tells you the stress and the strain that our frontline staff are on under a very, very bad government. And it's not just Queensland Health that's in crisis. There is a cost of living crisis, and Queensland is ground zero in that. And our focus is on the things that we control as a parliament, the things that this place can do something about. Let's start with electricity. Queensland had the biggest rise in electricity prices in the nation at 19.9%, double that of Victoria and New South Wales, triple of one of those entities. There was one state where the price went backwards, Western Australia. The only power that Labor are interested in is clinging to the kind that keeps them in office. The video that we've seen, released after question time today, raises more questions than it answers. And in a minute, the Shadow Minister for Energy is going to pose some of those questions. The video shows what happened, but it doesn't say why it happened. Power plants don't just blow up if they're well maintained, and clearly this one wasn't. No one, after nearly 1,000 days, is prepared to step up and answer questions and take responsibility. There is a crisis in health. There is a crisis in cost of living. There is a crisis in housing, and there is a crisis in youth crime. And after 10 years, after almost 10 years of this government, have things got better or worse when it comes to the youth crime crisis, to the housing crisis, to the health crisis? And are things better or worse for Queenslanders than a decade ago when it comes to their cost of living? Undeniably, on every one of those metrics, Queenslanders have had enough. And it doesn't have to be this way. Queenslanders need to know it doesn't have to always be like this. You don't have to live in fear in your home. You don't have to live in fear whether or not a brave paramedic can turn up in your hour of need. And you don't have to live in fear as to whether or not you can pay your bills. There is a better way, and the LNP has the right priorities for Queensland's future.
Deputy Speaker.
I call the member.